Right, I mean, there's like, how often is the building inspector monitoring this? How many times does it have to happen for it to be considered a violation? You would, if you keep it, you would really have to put some very specific parameters.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Maybe go weekly, monthly, every day?
Right, so I don't have, right, so I have the idea, but not the methodology, right? So, okay. Well, if it's, the last thing I want is to put something in that becomes undoable or fraught with problems. Okay, so yeah, I don't see a good way around it, and so I would agree that we probably have to strike it because I don't see it as workable. Okay, so.
Can I ask a related question, Mike, before we move off?
Sure.
Where, and forgive me if it's in the site plan and I don't recall how it's indicated, but where do we address formally the availability of the rock and snow parking spaces in the context of either the site plan or the resolution?
There's a provision in the resolution.
Didn't they sign an easement?
They signed an agreement.
Where is it
Okay.
acknowledged in our material?
I don't know that it is.
I believe it is.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I had
I
put
could
it
be
in-
wrong.
I had put it in at one point, but I think Ashley,
Because it's just another really important backstop that
Think
I
you're
think should be
well, we can.
memorialized in some way, either in the site plan or here.
We could put it in the record that, if you want to make that official, you can note in the record that
There's a bit of a problem with that, and that the 12 spots from rock and snow were not permanent. Our approval is permanent.
right.
So we considered whether or not the Water Street Market could handle this parking without a permanent agreement on the government property.
It's actually not permanent, it's annual.
That's what I'm saying, it's not permanent.
It's not.
No, the special use permit is annual.
Oh, it's not really. As
Well-
long as they're in compliance, it's.
Yeah,
it's
it just
real.
rolls.
Well-
You know, talk about the reality of it.
Okay, so we can,
We've never done
we
that.
can parse this further. I mean, commercial parking is not, we have the flexibility to make decisions about commercial parking we don't
Good.
have for
So let's do
residential. The Water Street Market is something that I think will assist the applicant, but because it's not available to them for every time that we know they would like to have performances, I don't think it's fair to really consider it at all in a formal sense from us. Because we can say, sure, but anyway, you get that point.
Okay.
There's also municipal parking,
Of course.
there's all of that, so, okay, so, all right, so let's get back to this. So we're gonna strike number 15, so we'll delete that.
Rich, I don't see it. I think it was in an earlier version that,
Yeah, it was, I had put it
Yeah.
in, but Ashley recommended for
Okay.
various reasons removing it. As far as number 13 goes, if everybody understands the reasoning behind why this is here.
So can I just ask about that? So if it says in the plan what they plan on doing, and we feel that that's compliant, then what would happen is then when they finish, if Brian felt they did not make the parking spots, that those didn't exist, at that point, he would say they were out of compliance. I mean, wouldn't that normally be how it works?
And is that supposed to be building permit or certificate of occupancy?
But that's what I was wondering.
Building permit.
well, this is a little bit different. This is, we sometimes put specific conditions in that are simply requirements of the code. And it's usually done simply to highlight things so that people
To do
understand.
what, I'm sorry?
To highlight for
Oh.
an applicant that sort of remember that this is something that you're required to do.
Okay.
But you never have to put those in because they're requirements of the code. This kind of fits into that category, is that the building inspector is always going to be determining whether or not any particular plan is in compliance, right? And so this is saying, the building inspector shall review the plan, certify the parking complies with all applicable village code and state building requirements. Well, he's required to do that anyway. So you can keep this in. I don't think it changes things, whether you keep it in or you take it out.
So then my question would be, yes, that's a typical requirement, but this maybe goes all the way back to the question I asked earlier, which is it typical that it would be a prohibition to the issuance of a building permit, or would it be just, or could it be just a prohibition to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy?
Yes.
So we're not holding up a building permit, it's for them to paint new lines, if that happens to be the element of noncompliance you discover.
Yes, you could, the only thing that's within your discretion in putting this in here would be the trigger point. So yes, you could change that very easily to certificate of occupancy.
But the current standard is that it's a certificate of occupancy. Like if it goes out, then it would be true as of the certificate of occupancy, right?
What do you mean if it goes out?
Like if it wasn't here at all, then what the standard would be is that the certificate of occupancy wouldn't be provided if these were out of code.
Right, if you put a trigger in here, then it puts the onus on Brian to actually do something by that time, right? Whether that's building permit or certificate of occupancy. If it's not in here at all, it's just up to Brian to determine that at any time, either before or after certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
It's just a code violation if they're not in compliance with the code. So if you eliminate it, they still have to obviously comply with all village code and building code requirements. If you put it in as building permit, it means that Brian has to make sure that happens prior to building permit. If you put certificate of occupancy, he only has to do it prior to certificate of occupancy. And if you don't have it at all, it's just whenever Brian determines it.
Okay, so what do you guys want to do about that one? Leave it as is, delete it, or modify it?
So basically, just sorry to clarify, if we suggest it changes to certificate of occupancy, it's just saying that we're giving them the opportunity to move forward, but before they get a C of O, if Brian doesn't feel they've got it right, then he's going to not give it to them.
Correct.
So it could stay, but with a change to certificate of occupancy possible?
Well, I would argue it makes more sense to change it to CO because you're not going to modify Water Street Market lot right away. That's not your first step, right, Richard?
Right, but if I were the guy paying for this, I wouldn't spend a dime on a theater before I knew that the parking was in compliance, because otherwise, you could build a building, yay, C of O, oh, you can't do it, So that's what I'm saying here. It's not clear to me what the quantitative aspects are of this. Like, what are you looking? It's the 12 spots. Is that? And then where are those 12 spots?
No.
No.
This is the
Well, it says
sponsored code.
parking being provided by. Is it all of Water Street Market? So it's
No.
confusing. Yeah.
No, it's the 12 spots, whether or not the 12 spots that are needed in the Water Street Market complies with all village code and state building requirements.
So I have to basically draw a map, designate which parking spots are for theater, stuff it into the planning board spot for posterity.
And then make sure the spots are the right size and the aisle is.
Well, before I can designate the spots, I would have to do that. And ask at least 12 in turn.
So you're arguing in favor of keeping 13 as it's written? No, you.
No, I'm saying that
That you want.
I wish I knew right now if those 12 spots are clear. I don't know what it means. I don't know what level.
But
It's not quantitative here.
you realize, though, that,
Yeah.
let's assume that this isn't in here at all.
Right.
You still
All
have
right.
to do that.
He can still do that at any
Yeah.
time,
Okay.
Right.
right? So there's nothing new. This just says you have to be code compliant.
It's just
This
punctuating.
board, even if it tried to, could not say, you don't have to be code compliant. We're going to approve a plan that's not code compliant. So they can't do that anyway. So I don't know why having it done earlier, I mean, you can have discussions with Brian to determine whether or not you believe
Right,
that it's
I
going
would
to
do
code
that.
compliant, but if it's a condition,
Yeah.
as an applicant, I would want that final trigger date to be as far out as possible, so that
Yeah,
if there
that's
was
great.
anything, I can just go ahead and
Absolutely,
adjust
I
it.
agree.
And
Yes.
you have the plans, you can go and measure your parking spots. you could know
Okay.
whether they're big
It's not a
enough.
big secret.
Right.
Do you have 12 spaces? Are they the right dimensions?
Right.
Do you have the proper aisle widths
Okay.
to get in and out?
And the
Yeah.
Do
ADA.
you have,
Right.
do you have the necessary number of handicap spaces, and
Right.
are they in a location that enables people who can use those spaces to get to the theater entrance
Right.
without, failing to meet ADA requirements?
Right, well, the thing is, this is a new item, and I haven't looked at that, and I assume that it's fine, but we would look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, but this, just as a note, nowhere in here are 12 spaces mentioned. So I would, or.
But that's your only demand on Water Street Market?
Right, but it's, as long as there's a clarity to that, because when I read it, I was like, well, I don't know if this means all over the market, or,
I
but
think-
it
I
does
think
say
he's-
being
I think
provided.
he's made it clear
Good, okay.
in numerous comments tonight that
Okay.
it's not, we're talking about
Great.
the impact of the theater and the requirements that the theater are drawing
Okay.
from this. All right, just try to think about this as a parking lot out on Mars. It doesn't matter that it's next door, it
Yeah.
still matters
Right.
that
I
it
get
be
it.
compliant. Doesn't matter who owns it, it matters, because this is the only place that this project is absolutely dependent on parking, okay?
Got it. Okay.
Rock and Snow is a great thing to have, but
Yeah.
it doesn't meet 100% of the criteria. So-
Okay, with this clarity, after this discussion, I'm feeling a lot more confident.
Good.
I wasn't clear
Okay.
on what it meant.
All right.
Yeah, okay, good.
The concern I have now is, are you clear enough that if we vote on this resolution tonight, we're gonna have the last time we put
Yeah.
forth a resolution,
Right.
it blew up on the table.
You know
Is
what?
this blowing up on the table tonight?
That-
Or we're gonna-
Let me just point out that this has been atypical. We don't
Yeah.
normally share resolutions with our applicants.
Right.
We do not negotiate resolutions with our applicants. There's a certain complexity here because of the potential impacts of this project and its necessity of utilizing an adjacent site that we have engaged in this process.
Mhm.
It's our decision whether or not to vote on it. If
Okay.
the applicant is not satisfied with the results of that,
With that said, I would say go ahead and vote on it, leave it
We're
as
not
is.
done yet. We're
I
still
mean,
going
I'm
through
saying,
that.
what I'm saying is, so C of O is better, yes, go for it, yes, that's.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
I think, yeah,
all right,
yeah.
we have a limited number of hours in this day.
Mhm.
I would like to keep pushing along here.
But, sorry to bring up one other item on that, on that
Is this-
number.
is this-
But
go
you
ahead.
talked about the compliance role with the building inspector and the certificate of occupancy. Do you want to have the and/or village planner in that statement?
Good point. Probably not,
Yeah, it
because
probably makes more
you're
direct.
not involved in enforcement and compliance issues. All right, so the recommendation then is, prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the building inspector shall review, and the rest of it remains unchanged. Acceptable, not acceptable?
Acceptable.
All right,
Move on.
all right.
Which way are we going?
Well, now we can head back to number one, I guess. So we don't need to go through all of them.
But are we talking about any of the other,
We're talking about specific conditions.
no, the ones that they,
I'm not even looking at theirs, I'm looking at the resolution.
Okay.
You're free to look at the comments from the applicant.
okay, well, we were.
Yeah.
Looking at comments. Because I would have to say that 5, I know that you don't open it for comments, but 5 was also a reasonable comment.
Okay,
Because that's in terms of what we agreed on in the last meeting.
okay, so what's the?
I think the wording in the last meeting was basically, I guess we didn't have performance wording, we had just that. it-
We had hours of operation.
Right.
Yeah, we've still-
But I think they made it clear that they were gonna do performance, they wanted to potentially do some performances during the day and the weekdays.
Okay. And my understanding is those were limited to special events.
Oh, is that a separate,
That we can add that, it doesn't exist in this resolution.
I see. I guess maybe that's where the.
I think it would become very gray to have a distinction between a special event versus a
Okay.
performance. I think that, I don't recall having consensus and certainly not unanimity on number 5.
Okay, well, it was,
among the members of the board, so I'm hoping that we would strike it.
All right, well, it was also there largely to provide a framework for number 15, which is no longer exists, so there's really no reason to restrict hours or specify what these are. It was there solely to be able to say, okay, this is the range of times, and then we're going to be counting cars around these times. Okay. So I'm hearing a couple of people would like to strike this. Others?
So if we strike this, then they can have performances anytime, anywhere, any day.
Well, not
night,
anywhere.
1, 2, 3
They
o'clock.
can have them anywhere. They can have them there.
Okay,
They
I mean,
can-
not
I mean,
anywhere, let's
there are-
remove that comment. But they
there
can
are-
have them at any time. And see, I think that we need to structure it so that they can't say, okay, well, we're going to do performances at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Well, but we
Stop.
don't typically put this kind of constraint on any business in town.
Mhm.
We don't tell restaurants when they can open and close. And I'm not sure that we're even allowed to do that, except to the extent that there are impacts that we can then cover under a special use permit.
That's correct. Specifically, planning boards do not have the legal authority, as the courts have determined many times, to dictate the operational aspects of a business, except to the extent, as Michael said, it impacts on one of the things that you are allowed to do. So theoretically, you're allowed to do it with respect to parking, but if you've already determined that parking is not going to be a problem, unless your own minds, it was parking is not a problem at certain times, then you have to decide whether or not this is in. If you've determined that parking is adequate, and it can be adequate at any time, then you should not be limiting the performances unless an applicant volunteers and says, sure, you can limit my thing, which is not what I understand this applicant is saying.
I'll also note that this, regardless of any of this, this is a special use in this district, which means that the special use provisions as per our code will apply, which means, for example, if there are performances at times of day that create a nuisance for neighbors, and there are noise complaints, and they make their way to the building inspector. The building inspector is authorized to tell the planning board, and the planning board can call the applicant in and say, under these conditions, you're violating your special use permit because you are failing to meet the criteria of the special use permit, which is true anywhere, which is that this is an allowed use in this district, provided that the operation does not, you can say this better than me.
Well, actually, it comes down to something actually narrower than that, as I read your code, and that is, if there's a violation,
Yeah.
then it can be brought in. So it's a violation of the specific provisions, special permit provisions, or it's a violation of any condition that you have in your resolution.
Not a violation of our code.
Not some violation of any provision of the code, violation dealing with special use
Okay.
and violation of your conditions in here.
Okay.
So if you have a condition in here saying that they have to have adequate parking at all times available to them, if that's determined to be violated, they can be brought back and address that issue.
So if, in a hypothetical case, if they decide they want to start doing Rocky Horror Show midnight performances live,
Right?
It's gotta be loud.
then, and they go on from midnight to 2.
Right.
But, whether it's this place or anybody else, and there are noise complaints,
Then it's
they wouldn't be violating the special use permit.
yeah, it wouldn't be the special use permit. They would simply be subject to enforcement under the code for a noise violation.
Okay. All right.
Is that the village then, not the planning board?
Correct.
I see.
Well, then I would recommend that we leave this in and that we modify it to read, performances are generally limited to weekend evenings, Sunday evenings, and weekend matinees. That special performances at other times, special events at other times are allowed.
But then what would prevent them from having the 2 AM event that you just described might be objectionable? What, if we really thought that what we're
Yeah.
trying to prevent here is some 2 AM event that might be disruptive, which we do have enforcement opportunities to either restrict or eliminate, it could say limited to the hours of 9 AM to midnight or 9 AM to 11 PM
Right.
any day of the week. I don't know that it's necessary,
Yeah,
but there's a idea that we're trying to make sure that something that could generate noise outside of the building is prohibited from doing so at hours that would be objectionable to the neighbors. We could just bracket the hours and leave it at that. I think as long as you still say special opportunities, then
Yeah,
that special
then it's
opportunity
wide
might be a rave at 4 in the morning, you know?
I think that a bad path to go down is to try to utilize the special permit process to cover all ills.
Yeah.
So if the ill is like any other ill of a business in the village at their exceeding noise limitations, then I think the planning board should allow those normal processes to work out as they are with any other
All right.
business.
So keep it or delete it?
I would say keep it the way it
Keep
is.
it. Just keep
This
it
is
as
what
it is.
we base this whole project on those hours, that kind of schedule. Our public hearing was based on, this is what we've always talked about.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm in favor.
Well, you do, if you're going to keep it, in all fairness, there has been long discussion, more recent vintage than older vintage, but there would be special events at other times. So I think you would have to add that in to this, I think, in order to, because they have said they will have special events at other times. And the problem, I think, as Rich is bringing up, is if you're talking about special events at other times, you've now made limitation meaningless.
Yeah, what is
Okay,
special? Something could be weekly and be special.
I also don't understand how we can keep this in if it's not tied to anything.
Right.
I say delete it.
Now we're dictating hours and we're not allowed to do that, so.
And also special events, they are performances. I mean, it's this,
Yeah.
they're not different.
Yeah, no, I know.
So, yeah, I feel like what I'm hearing is that it is not our purview to control when they operate, and that there are other rules, other parameters in place that if they're going to be loud at 2 in the morning, just like any other business.
Just so that I'm
be
clear,
dealt with.
just so that I'm clear, this board doesn't have the power to do that. The village board actually has the power to do that. It would be outside of the zoning code, and they could say that all businesses must shut down at 11 o'clock, or no business can operate on Sundays, all right? The village board has the ability, through their police powers, to be able to do that, those general broad health, safety, welfare, to go ahead and do that. But the planning board does not have the jurisdiction to do that.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense.
Deleted.
All right, so we're going to take that out? Okay.
But is it a majority that,
Are we hearing a majority, we're going to remove this? I mean, I'm not sure why we even need to vote if we're not allowed to do it.
well, I just want to make it clear so that we do that. I mean, my opinion to you is that you cannot put this in here when it's not tied to something that is within your jurisdiction.
Right, and it no longer seems to be, so I fear that that's
Okay.
leverage for getting sued, and that doesn't make sense,
Okay.
so. Yeah, I know, you have to go. Thank you for your time. Okay,
Now your vote will count.
all right, so I'm assuming that previous issues 1 through 4 are fine with everybody? Item 6, the applicant's existing 12-foot right-of-way shall not be used for any purpose related to the theater. Is there any language changes in that item that we need to consider?
This is another example of something that I don't recall unanimity or consensus on saying that private right-of-way between the owner and another owner.
This was in the previous, this was in the very first resolution. I'm just, for the start.
I recall it being limited to the hours that they were able to use that access.
Nope.
The right-of-way on Wirtz? No, it was decided early on the applicant said, we're not going to use that. And as a result of that, you didn't look into other potential impacts of that being used as an access. That sort of eliminated your review of, can vehicles go through there, and what's going to happen with vehicles and circulation and parking, all sorts of things.
So in the prior resolution, there was a reference that bracketed the hours of access. That wasn't referring to the hours of access through the right-of-way, it was referring to what hours of access? It was 6 a.m. to... Because I recall a conversation about the idea of accessing the back entrance and why that was an important need for the operators.
What do you mean for the operators?
For the applicants. Am I...
So I don't
The applicant's
understand.
existing
It doesn't-
12-foot right-of-way
It doesn't
shall...
mean that they can't use the back door. It just means that movement between the theater and Wirtz Avenue is off limits.
So how do you access the back of the theater without using the right-of-way?
What would you be using it? You could-
Loading and unloading of...
Loading and unloading, we were
people?
told, all happens from the front door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people are staying, and the only argument we heard was that if people are associated with the theater and they're residing in the yellow building, they might want to use the back door, but in that case, they'll be walking across the same property, 12 Main Street. They'll never be using that. And it's not like, just to go out on a limb here, no, I'm not even going to say that. I mean, basically, what it's saying is that it's basically saying what the applicant previously said, which was that there would be no traffic of any sort related to the theater coming off of Wirtz Avenue.
I mean, it was recognized that there's an enforceability problem, that
Yeah.
stopping an individual person from using that. But it was the representation of the applicant. It was included in the initial draft resolution of September 14th, the identical language.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. There were suggestions to change it, and it's back to what it was. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be a police officer or a peace officer standing there making sure. It just means that it creates the mechanism for enforcing this. And this is consistent with what the applicant has said all along.
May I speak a second? Just two little items. It just came up in my mind that if you had a landscape vehicle to do landscaping behind the building,
Sure.
let's say you had a tree, would you want to walk that from the Water Street parking lot and all the way down and through the retaining wall and up to the back, or would you be able to maintain the building, to paint the building, to
Snow removal.
fix the roof? Snow removal, like
Snow-
good one.
Okay,
Trash.
snow
So,
removal and
maybe
trash
not
removal.
trash.
All right,
That's-
snow
yeah,
removal and
that's-
trash removal
yeah.
are not specific to the theater. This is a site.
Okay.
It has another building on it. Vehicles are not, it doesn't mean that vehicles are no longer allowed to walk in and go in and out of there. It doesn't mean that
Okay.
people can't walk in and out of there. It means that that operations typically associated with
Got it.
this theater
Yes.
and
Right.
patrons
Yes.
of this theater cannot
Yes.
use this.
Okay.
That's what it means. Let's not lose common sense here, okay?
Well, my concern is that we not lose common sense as well, because
Good.
one of the things, okay, so, and maybe it's PTSD from the time where we were trying to negotiate between two landowners that one has to shovel the other person's path. I'm trying to be thoughtful about the number of times where we are creating language and resolutions that actually either interfere, overturn, or amend a right-of-way between two private owners. And I'm just trying to be thoughtful about the way that happens.
We're not altering the legality of the right-of-way, and the applicants made that clear. But what happened was that these two, in this case, the two people who share this easement have not come to terms about how they want to use this, and so the decision was they were going to limit, the applicant said he'll limit access
For the theater use.
for the theater use.
Can I just
They don't
make a
know.
little suggestion? Because I hear both of these points. I wouldn't want it suggested to the neighbor that they could never be on that spot. So what if it just added the word operations after theater? Because related to the theater is very broad. Actually doing landscaping is related to the theater. But related to the operations of the theater are internal operations, and that's the stuff that you're saying there shouldn't. So you shouldn't have your actors walking up through Worth Street. And you shouldn't have your audience walking. So anything with the operations of the theater as opposed to, I think just related to theater is a little broad, because
I think what you're saying, and we actually say the same thing somewhat differently in the first and second sentence, but I think the thrust of it was really the second sentence, and that was that right-of-way was not to be used for purposes to access the theater. No, for theater use. So if we reworded it to say, shall not be used for vehicles or pedestrians to access the theater.
Okay. That sounds like what you already have there.
Well,
first sentence.
the first,
In the first sentence.
yeah, in other words,
All
Or
right.
just really take away the first sentence.
yeah, it's really a combination of the first and second sentences,
Okay.
so that the right-of-way shall not be used by vehicles or pedestrians to access the theater.
So again, you could take out the first sentence.
It's
It says,
combining these.
neither
Well, I'm just
vehicles-
combining it because you
Combining
need to
them.
have some context.
So
in
the
it.
applicant's existing 12-foot right-of-way
Oh, I
to
see.
Wirtz Avenue shall not be used by vehicles or pedestrians to access the theater.
Right.
Does that help? We lost
Yeah.
Rich Studo.
Does that,
Well, as long as a landscape, as long as we're not creating a potential lawsuit or something between these two owners. I mean, as long as the landscaper, a snow removal, a painter,
Well,
whatever
It's
they're
still-
accessing.
Well,
Okay,
you
as long
certainly,
as it's
this
clear.
does not
Okay,
increase any possibility for a lawsuit, because your rights are much greater than that under your easement. So
Okay.
any law, you have a right to go ahead and utilize your easement for any purpose right now, right? This only limits it for purposes of this approval to
I
use the
see.
theater
okay.
for people to access it for the
this
theater.
application.
And that's it.
Okay, great. So,
No, that's,
and it's assuming the inside of the theater.
okay, well,
Okay, so let's, all right. Then let's do number 6 as modified.
yeah.
All right. All right. There was some questions about there shall be no events outside of the theater building. And there was a comment about the audience having to walk out to get to their cars. That's not an event.
okay.
An
No, we're
event
good.
is an event.
We're
It's
good with it.
something.
We don't have any problem with
Good.
it. No?
Thank you. There shall be no mechanical equipment located on the roof. I don't think that's controversial.
No, but it could be.
Lighting modifications, fine. Stormwater management, fine. We've dealt with the signage issue. Number 12, you'll comply with all applicable state, county, and local regulations concerning off-street parking. I'm not clear about why we're referring to off-street parking here.
I'm a little bit behind, I'm still trying to
Yeah, that's
do
fine.
the specific
Go
condition
ahead.
number 6, so that I can modify this
Yeah.
and get it to you.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So number 12 on page 9, the theater shall comply with all applicable state, county, and local regulations concerning off-street parking. I'm not sure why we're addressing off-street parking at all.
Does that refer to ADA requirements for handicap parking?
I'd have to look at, again, Village Code, Section 212-41S.
That's a special use standard for like indoor recreation, and theater is encompassed within it. It's
So-
the special use standards for different uses.
Yeah,
In Article,
I think this is really, again, just compliance with the code.
Okay, so does it need to be there?
No.
Okay.
Right.
So let's strike number 12.
Okay.
In other words, there's never an instance where
you always have to comply with
Right.
this. Okay. All right. So 13 we've covered. 14 we're okay with. This has to do with ADA issues. I don't know why that would, I mean, he has to do that. So.
Say that again, which one?
14. Building inspector, well, it's really just the building inspector, right? Would review the plans and certify the applicant is in compliance with.
Yeah, it's an enforcement issue.
Right, so.
So, I mean, it's not necessary to be in here because that's an obligation anyway. It's like saying that
Okay.
prior to issue of a building permit, the building inspector is going to make sure that it's compliant with the state building code.
All right, so strike 14? Yes, no? All right, seems pretty similar to 13 or 12 in this case. Okay,
So that was, yes.
so we'll strike
Yes.
number 14. And we've struck 15.
So does that include both comments?
What do you mean both
Well,
comments?
because there's a comment, but then it continues. a second
I,
time.
like I said, I'm not reading their comments, I'm just going through the resolution. If there's something in the comment you think's germane.
But I mean, 15 is struck,
Right.
even the second part of it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
16, to the extent this approval, including specific and general conditions, requires modifications to the site plan of the adjoining Water Street Market property, then prior to
No,
the...
that's part of 15.
It's part of 15?
16 is?
No, no.
It's number 16.
Oh,
So the
me-
numbering
let me-
may have been lost.
yeah, let me take a look at this.
This is the second to last one of the specific
Yeah,
conditions.
okay, I
Page 10.
If you want to work backwards.
To the extent of this approved, that one? Oh, I see. See, it doesn't have a number on ours.
it was
It
the,
lost the numbers on ours.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
what I was asking.
Let me-
about.
let me
I
just-
see.
That was the
Sorry.
same one as 15, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have a new
Right.
number on it, so I thought.
yeah, I was looking
it
at the
being
modified
struck.
one as well. So let me look at the one that we circulated. And,
Apologize for that, if I struck that.
yes, 16 is, you had talked about previously.
Yeah, so my...
is going to
so
be-
This would be useful for Bryant to weigh in, but my take on this is that this plan has changes to the Water Street Market site plan. It has a different parking configuration, it has landscaping, and it might have some minor modifications to the retaining wall or some of the other walls. So the question is, it's my understanding that the village has been working over the years to try to bring site plans into agreement with what's actually out in the field. And so if we are modifying, if we're approving a plan here that specifically is modifying an adjacent property, and it's agreed, we have the legal agreements to do it, isn't it an obligation then for Water Street Market to come and submit a site plan amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's all this says, is that, and the only thing is that it does set a threshold, which is the certificate of occupancy. If it sets no threshold, then there's no mechanism for, other than having to go through the court system, right?
Right.
Which is more time-consuming and more costly to the village if it's than to simply have an applicant come forward and submit the application for a site plan amendment.
I say keep it.
Now, a question to Rick, based on what you said earlier. If that site plan amendment is brought forward as a separate application, do we focus only on the specific changes that are
Absolutely.
germane to this? Okay.
Absolutely.
So it's not a carte blanche to look
No,
at
not at
everything
all.
on the Water Street
So
Market site plan?
Right.
if you're thinking
Right.
about keeping it, then I would put in here, which we don't have, I think it's implied, but we should have in here who's going to be making this determination, and it should be, I think Bryant should be making this determination that it's not consistent with some site plan, because that's his normal obligation of enforcement generally, is
Okay.
to make sure that things are in conformance with all site plan.
Okay, that's fine.
Is it possible that it might read, after the comma, the Water Street Market property may be required to return or shall be required? Is it absolute that if there's any change, any modification, I guess it's a modification that meets a certain threshold that requires a site plan review, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean,
You could reword it to say.
feels like a may and not a shall.
Can I just ask
Yeah, I
how
can-
this works? So if they figure out that the lines of the parking are not narrow enough, because this is all that, if we're talking about is parking.
No, it's not all
Oh,
we're
it's
talking
not
about.
just-
No, it's
okay.
not. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
It's,
that's fine.
this,
For clarity.
this plan has changes off-site on the Water Street Market.
Oh.
It has
Right.
reconfigured parking, it has landscaping, it's got some other minor changes.
I see.
It's all focused in this area right here. And
And that
As-
part of it is not Water Street, is Water
this is
Street.
on Water Street Market. And as trivial as those changes may be, I just want to point out that we have accepted applications for recently a woman who had a platform in her rear yard. It was bigger than the 144 square feet. So she had to pay the necessary fees and go through the process in order to get an approval for that. All right? Which is much more trivial than what we're asking here.
Yeah.
And so all we're saying is that the applicant would need to come back so that this, should it be approved, is then consistent with a site plan from Water Street Market. So 20 years from now, somebody comes along and they says, okay, so here's two applications for the same, two site plans for the same thing, and they don't agree, and they're both approved.
Yep.
That's all we're saying.
So can I finish my thought?
Yes.
Because then it sounds like no matter what, their site plan is changing.
Yes, it is.
So
Should they get this approval?
So it's just basically saying that Water Street Market needs to submit a new site plan.
No. What this is saying is that to the extent that the theater's approval requires modifications, and I would add at the end of that, in the opinion of the building inspector. So if Brian says, because of the theater's site plans being approved, if that requires modification, so it may be a change, but Brian would say, yeah, but that's not a change that rises to the level that requires modifications to Water Street Market, then it's not, even though it's a change, they don't have to come in. It would
Okay.
only be if, in the opinion, which I'm going to add, in the opinion of the building inspector, if the opinion of the building inspector is that this approval mandates that the other site plan be amended because it needs an amended site plan, not just that they can change something without having to formally come back, then they don't have to come back
But
at
if you
all.
decide that the landscaping and the changing of some lines doesn't require a Water Street site plan.
Right. That would be in the opinion of
That's
Brian,
what
to
I-
whether or not it rises to the level
Okay.
of something that would mandate a site plan amendment.
Okay.
So the only change that I would suggest is, it says, to the extent that this approval, comma, including its specific and general conditions, comma, requires modifications to the site plan of the adjoining Water Street Market property in the opinion of the building inspector, comma, and then the rest would remain the same.
All right. Okay, and I don't, and 17 again is sort of just a reference to the code, but given that this is a special use permit, I would prefer myself to leave that in.
Yes.
Other board members? Fine? Okay. We have a majority on that. I don't think there are any general conditions that have raised any eyebrows or concerns. I would like to ask one question about the site plan itself. So on the Water Street Market property, there are currently, as shown on this plan, there are 3 spaces in the center here that are striped. Would you be willing to remove those spaces?
First off, this plan is only referencing landscape and lighting. So I just want to say the number, these spaces,
Yeah.
you want to refer to.
Yeah,
just
yeah,
as
no,
a
I know.
procedure. Yeah, because I didn't even.
No,
look
I
at that.
know
didn't
that, I
think-
know.
Okay.
This is the only one I have
So
in hand.
Yeah, yeah, but I think those, are they shown on the other plan?
I
just
have
wanna-
a whole bunch here.
Yeah, I just would, because I didn't even, I took an old plan, slapped it on it.
Go look for it.
It was, I didn't get the plan from the engineer, I asked him, so we had to. So I
Well-
just want to check what's on his drawing before we even.
Okay.
It may be shown or not, it may not be.
Well, the
shown.
reality is that they are currently striped out there.
Yes.
And people are using them.
My understanding is that the owner has previously struck them out, painted them over.
Right.
At the request of, I don't
Right.
know, there was a request, obviously, for him to do the action, so I would.
Yeah, but they got repainted.
It would be,
I think the black faded away. I don't think they got repainted. Anyway, I would think that he'd be okay with that, but we can.
yeah, I mean, based on,
but I-
based on conversations we
We
had.
talked about it.
We did talk about it.
But yeah. I think it's page. Okay,
Here's the
so no, they're
theater.
still
They're still
showing
there.
there. Okay, I just want to make sure, 'cause my plan
Right.
wasn't addressing that,
So
okay.
if it would be acceptable, I would like to see a site plan in which they're removed, and if it's necessary to discourage parking in some fashion, you know, maybe you can even have printed on the asphalt, no parking.
All right.
Something like that. It's not a condition in the resolution, but it would be, based on conversations we had previously, I believe that that would be acceptable to him, and if it still is, that would be great.
Okay,
Okay. Okay, great. So with this, with the numerous amendments to the resolution,
Can we get a clean copy of this before we vote on it?
we can. I was going to ask whether that was something
My
we have
apologies.
with these numerous resolutions. Would you like to vote on this tonight, or would you rather get a clean copy and then vote on this at the next meeting?
I want to get a clean copy.
I feel comfortable voting on it. I mean, I can visualize the changes personally.
Okay, right. Others?
I'm still thinking about it, Rich.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I tracked the changes, I mean, most of them were full strikes as opposed to edits, and the edits that Rick repeated back to me, I'm comfortable with.
I could summarize them now
I want
if
to
you
make a
want.
general comment about procedurally how in my short time on the board, this is the first time where I've had an experience where, and you've said this, Michael, but I want to reiterate, had an experience where we didn't come to conclusions on the really important key factors and then try to memorialize those into a resolution as opposed to a draft resolution that then became a
Right.
negotiation tool. And I felt really uncomfortable with the idea of the applicant's notes being a part of the conversation as opposed to just my interpretation and feelings about the document and its contents. So, you know, I just wanted us to rethink procedurally how these things are done in the future. That said, where we are at the moment, I feel comfortable with what I understand to be the edits and the deletions to vote.
Okay.
I can summarize them if people want me to summarize them. I have them down as 3, 4, 7 modifications.
But I also respect why John would rather see it clean.
I'm okay, I would prefer a clean copy. I'm okay with getting a summary of the changes and then voting on that. Do you want to comment?
I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I had read this prior to the meeting, and really had no problem,
Okay.
and then discovered, as we sat here and talked, that I had a lot of problems.
Okay.
Or there were more problems than I thought existed. When I read through this, I thought this resolution was acceptable.
Okay.
and then came here and found out that it was not acceptable to a number of my colleagues. And,
All right, then I
so, you know,
I
I think
suggest,
I'm not as clear as, you know.
then I suggest that we postpone this and that we get a clean copy, and more importantly, that each of us have an opportunity then to read the final version at your leisure and make sure that you are comfortable with that. Because we can't vote on it and then come back later and say, oops. So with that in mind,
I would also like to see Dennis included in on this.
Yeah.
It's very important in the whole discussion.
okay. With that in mind, then we will conclude this. We'll get a revised version of this resolution, and it is not my intention to have a negotiation or discussion with you any further about this.
I would suggest we do not send it to the applicant.
It's not my intention to send it to
Please
the
don't.
applicant.
Okay, please do. We're okay with that.
And if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable about that you've heard tonight, and I'm not getting the sense that you have, you're free to review the video, and you can send us an email about those specific things.
No, we are good.
All right, and I'll just remind you, we do need the revision date on your signage plan.
I'll just submit a revised copy.
That would be perfect.
Yep.
Okay, well, then with that, I think we're done with this application for tonight.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys for your time. Ryan, thank you so much for sticking it out.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I like the look, Brian.
Clean sheet.
I don't know, I kind of like the beard, man.
Gentlemen, we're not done.
Kind of lost the New Paltz shrine.
Okay, we have one more application, and we still have a few things, and looks like Jonathan's going to prove me wrong.
I was just looking at it going,
Until this one, I
I
know.
was watching, I'm like, all right.
I was feeling a sense of urgency. Okay. So we have one last application, PB 1728. Ms. Steffens will leave the table and return as an applicant. Okay, we had a public hearing this evening about this. We got two comments. One that seemed to be neutral, but pointed out this would be a small lot, maybe the smallest on Elting. And the other one that was clearly in the negative, raised a number of concerns about this particular application. So just bear that in mind as we go through it. We have a resolution for this to consider.
Well, can I comment to those two things real quickly?
You may.
It's not the smallest lot in the neighborhood.
You only said it might be.
You know.
Sure.
No, Willie's a good guy. The other letter, I think speaks for itself. I don't know what she's talking about in terms of concrete not blasting. There's a small retaining wall that would come down with your foot. You don't need anything more than that to take that retaining wall down. That's the concrete she's talking about, if
Okay.
that's it.
Are there trees that you expect to be
The whole
removing?
design of this was to save as many trees as possible.
Okay,
I think what the neighbors don't realize is that, I mean, this is no kind of threat, but the village allows me to cut all the trees down up to the 25-foot setback.
regardless of that.
No, I'm saying, that's why the whole intention here was to save all those trees.
Okay,
That's why it was moved to the very back of the lot.
so are there trees coming down?
Very few,
Okay.
yes.
And-
But there has to be, there's there are at least 4 trees in the location of the building that have to come down.
Will there be trees remaining from so if you're on the street and you're looking towards the building, will you be looking straight at the building, or will you be looking through?
You'll be looking through the trees at the building because
Okay.
most of the trees will remain.
Okay,
It's the other reason why we've made the easement for utilities to go onto Lot A,
right,
so we can stay away from the root system of those trees
okay.
and put the water and sewer lines over to parcel A as much as possible.
What do you anticipate the duration of construction for this project to be?
3 months?
Okay. All right. So,
when are you going to begin?
We'd like to do the site work now, and then the construction will probably do modular in the early spring. That's the reason for it being very quick, very easy to do.
Okay.
Now, what was brought up, and I had a discussion with the attorney, was all the subdivision work is clearly presented here, all the setbacks, we can show the building, we can show adequate parking for both spot lots. What's not clearly shown on here is the site plan of the driveway.
Right.
So the site plan portion of this needs to be modified to show the driveway,
Okay.
but not the subdivision map.
Okay.
So you're going to provide a separate,
Yeah, I've got the vellums already on the subdivision.
right, so
They're
you're
ready
going
to
to, you're
go.
going to provide a separate site plan then?
Well, we'll modify this plan to show the
Yeah,
driveway.
the better way to do it is,
To show it?
you can either take an action, and it's very usual, actually, in a lot of subdivision applications, where at the end, a planning board may want certain changes to the plat, usually in the form of site plan aspects, less so in terms of where the lines are going to be. But there are many times a bunch of small changes, and so the condition is that it gets approved, subject to those being placed on the plan prior to the signing of the plat.
Okay,
But Rick, does it go on the site plan or the subdivision map?
You have, the way state law works is, it's a little bit odd, but it says when you have a subdivision that includes site plan elements, and therefore the site plan is being included, state law says that it's really just a subdivision review. Just happens to be a subdivision review with site plan elements in it. So I don't know what the county map department wants or doesn't want on its plats with respect to filing. So I don't pretend to know that. From a planning board point of view, it's normally, everything is put on here,
on the subdivision.
on the plat, right?
Okay.
And then it's usually at least in Orange County, where I do almost all of the work, is that they look at the map division, looks at it, and just worries about the lines, doesn't worry about the site plan stuff, but the site plan stuff is actually on the plat. But you'd have to ask the Ulster County, I don't know what they call it here, in real property division, whatever it is with the maps, and ask them what they want on a plat. And if they want less on a plat, you'd get this particular plat that shows all this subdivision, you'd get that signed by Michael. And then if they require one with less detail, you'd provide one with less detail that he would also sign.
I thought that in the past, there has been recordation of subdivision with site plan details from this planning board in Ulster County.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Well,
definitely
this
have.
has a lot of site plan details.
Yeah, and we have done
And
that.
since
It's just
I
missing the
thought
driveway.
Okay.
that we were reviewing the subdivision as the site plan.
Yeah, together, right.
Yeah, we are together with those details on here. Okay, so you need to amend it to,
To show the driveway.
to show the driveway.
Well,
And that's,
it also needs to be amended to have the legend properly reflect what you say that it means. For instance, the long line dot is really what you say is the limits of your right-of-way, right?
Yes.
Okay, but over on the legend, it says it's a setback line.
Okay, yes. Noted that.
thought it was the setback one.
But that's not,
Happens to be just about the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, and just to complicate the discussion further, the specific conditions in the decision that's before you has reference to 12.5 feet on each side for easement, but the labeling on the plan is 12 feet. So I think we need to get the numeric labels corrected as well.
I agree, that's
So
another
I'll
thing that we
change the
talked
driveway
about.
to 12.5, so it agrees with 12.5 setbacks?
Well, you need, you say that this is 25 feet, your easement,
Yes.
right? And so that would normally be 12 and a half feet on either side of the property line.
Yeah.
But you say it's 12 feet, so it has to match. So you either have a 24-foot easement
Or 25.
or 25,
Okay.
but
and the specific conditions don't add up either, because they say 24-foot right-of-way with 12 and a half feet on each side.
Right, you're right.
Yeah, I got 24-foot right away, we'll just change that to a 25-foot right of way.
Fine.
So then it agrees with the
And
setback.
then note on the plan.
Right.
Right, and then noted on the plan, and we'll revise the resolution to say
Like
25
general
feet.
notes and then
Right.
Annotated notes
So
up
where,
there.
where's that 12 foot here? That's be 12.5.
Okay. Rick, do the specific conditions need to specify the site plan change that you're talking about? Because I don't think that it does. The clarification of the driveway.
No, I think specific condition number 1 gets to all of this. It
It
says,
does,
prior to
okay.
the signing of the final plat, the applicant shall add notations that clearly delineate the limits of the proposed 25-foot right-of-way with 12.5-foot easements on both sides.
Okay,
So
That's-
he has to do that by making various
Okay.
changes in here.
all right, fine.
And 2 addresses the need to add the driveway, correct? To the
No,
plan.
2 is a separate problem.
All right, let's get to that
Oh,
one.
let's get to that one.
Okay, that problem is that, as this plat shows now, you have this 12-foot driveway that may move, when finally constructed, anywhere within the 25-foot
Right.
right-of-way, right? But it doesn't ever connect to any place that would be allowed for a garage or parking. In other words, it would just be, it's not a paved way, so you couldn't pave it, you couldn't put gravel down or anything else as far as a site plan. So somewhere you want to connect that driveway to the proposed 2-story structure, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that should be shown in there.
Because it's beyond the right-of-way,
Right,
right. So you need to show your driveway
right.
connecting
That says
to
it a
your
lot
garage.
simpler than I did.
Yeah, right.
That's all.
So I'm not sketching the
That's all.
driveway like
Right.
this.
Yep, that's all.
It's all coming down 12
Yep,
feet,
that's all you need to do. Okay, so that's number 2.
right?
Number 3 is obvious. Number 4,
So the,
okay, you'll submit architectural plans, and that's it for that. Okay,
so the minutes of the last meeting, and I didn't remember the discussion, or maybe I could clarify how it transpired, is that in terms of the existing house, it's my understanding the existing house is a single family?
Yes.
Okay. It's because the minutes say, I think the minutes read that the house is listed as a 2-family. And
Single family house.
it's a single-family house.
Yeah,
So
well,
that
that's
might
an-
be
that's
something
an
to
error.
clean up in the minutes.
okay. All right, so with those clarifications.
Do you want to talk about recreation considerations?
Oh, yeah, that's not on
And
here.
provide your rationale in terms of recreation considerations? I know that the village trustees have.
Yeah, let's just get
talked-
to it. We can't have a long discussion because it's 10:30. So there's a recreation fee required?
My
Let's
reading
set-
on the law, and I've reviewed this with Brian, was that there's a $1,000 recreation fee on a subdivision.
So
So that's the
Is that true or
building
not?
inspector's interpretation is that it's $1,000.
it doesn't matter what the amount is.
On
Actually,
a subdivision, it's $1,000 fee for the subdivision.
That's what the $1,000 for the subdivision, that's what the fee is.
Okay, so
I think it is correct in the schedule, but.
anyway, we don't set that. So we can add in here under
So,
specific conditions that.
but there's also a consideration as to whether you want to generally ascribe, if you're making a recreation consideration and you're making a finding that the recreation isn't provided on the site and that a fee is appropriate, you could do it either with the site plan or with
No, let's do it with the subdivision.
Yeah, let's get it done.
Let's do it with this, let's do it with the subdivision now so that it's
So
done.
I guess that's your prerogative.
So is that okay with the board?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. All right, so then we would add a specific condition that prior to signing of the final plat, the applicant shall pay, let me back up. Having determined that no recreational opportunities are available on the property. Prior to the signing of the final plat, the applicant shall pay the recreation fee for a single subdivision lot as set by the schedule, or as set by the village board of trustees. Okay?
Yep.
So that would be item number 5. All right, so with that addition, I'd like a motion to approve this resolution.
So moved.
To approve the final subdivision. Oh, do we have to go through the preliminary and sketch? Do we have to?
No, I think the way to do it is, in accordance with your code, you can basically skip to the final,
Okay,
and you're really not dealing with the preliminary.
we
so-
don't need to
No.
vote on the preliminary first?
No.
Okay, so, and I think you addressed that. Okay, so motion to approve the final subdivision plat and site plan approval for 56 Elton Avenue.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in
That'd
favor?
be subject to those changes that were noted on 12.5 driveway.
Yeah, well, that's part of the conditions.
all in the
It's all in the
resolution.
resolution.
All right.
Now, should we also indicate that Eve is voting in this instance? or-
Sure.
Well, it will be, yeah.
Yep. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Eve is voting in place of
Dennis.
Dennis, because Dennis was already left. Okay.
Done.
Thank you very much. You're done. One more quick important item that we need to cover.
See you later. I didn't even know that. Wait for me.
Okay, so, some time ago, we approved an additional building unit at the Ridge. And we approved specifically that they would have one affordable housing on the second, one on the first. They've come back to request that there be a change to that, and that both units, which are likely to be occupied by seniors, are on the first floor. The Affordable Housing Board has reviewed this and submitted a letter supporting this change. So the administrative question tonight is, are you all willing to accept this change in where the affordable housing units are located? Both of them will be on the first floor, so there'll be no stairs required to enter them. The new unit proposed is the same, according to the builder, as where it was previously recommended. So motion to approve this change.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve the minutes of October the whatever,
You want to make that change?
as amended.
Also, I was present.
Yes, I put that in there for her, and so was Rick. I did send you some changes. So minutes of October 17th, motion to approve
So moved.
as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn.
Wait, wait.
Wait, what?
I would like to say thank you to Michael for your preparation and your patience.
Yes. Here, here.
In dealing with the,
All of the applicants tonight?
yes.
And
Great.
managing in the absence of Christina, which I
Greatly
never want to have to
appreciated.
do again.
Yes, and for you to acknowledge that I was completely right in saying 10:30 to 11.
Agreed. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
All in favor?
Yeah, I gotta get John on it too.
No, I said as set by the village board. Because whatever it is, that's, yeah. I'm not getting into what it is.
Hey, Brian? Brian? I'm completely confident that should all of the